It was just another Tuesday morning. The same alarm clock blaring, dragging David from his dreams into the reality he knew all too well. He rubbed his tired eyes and sat up in bed, staring at the gray walls around him. The same gray walls that had been there for years. The same walls that felt like they were closing in, even though they were perfectly still. Another day, another routine. He hadn't seen anything different in months. Every morning felt the same, like a repeat of yesterday. Wake up, go to work, come home, sleep, and repeat. It was a quiet, peaceful life, safe, but deep down, he knew it was hollow. His dreams felt like distant echoes in his mind, long forgotten. He had a job that paid the bills, a house with a roof over his head. But was that all there was to life? The whispers of doubt crept in again. What's the point of all this? David closed his eyes and shook his head. He had no answers, only questions. Only an aching sense that he was meant for something more. But fear held him back. Fear of failure. Fear of stepping into the unknown. He sighed, standing up and looking out the window at the gray sky. The world outside seemed just as gray, just as empty. Little did he know, something was about to shatter his world, something that would make him question everything he knew about himself. The storm was coming, and David didn't even see it coming. David sat in the break room, sipping his lukewarm coffee. He hadn't even realized how much time had passed, until his boss's voice cut through his thoughts. "I need to talk to you," Greg said, sounding unusually serious. David stood up, expecting something routine, but nothing about what happened next was routine. "We're facing some serious cuts. I'm sorry, David, but your position is being eliminated, effective immediately." The words hit him like a ton of bricks. He blinked, not sure if he'd heard him right. Was this some kind of joke? He'd been with the company for years. He had been loyal. It didn't make sense. "What do you mean? How could this happen?" David asked, his voice barely a whisper. His heart pounded in his chest, his breath shallow. Everything around him seemed to blur. His world was slipping out of focus, and for the first time in a long time he realized he was on his own. Greg's face was unreadable. As he nodded, "I'm sorry, David. The decision's been made." David's legs almost gave way beneath him. He couldn't breathe, couldn't process the magnitude of what was happening. Was this the universe's way of telling him it was time to move on? Or was it just one more hit in a life full of disappointments? He felt like the rug had been pulled out from under him, and now he was falling into the unknown, with nothing to hold on to. As he walked out of the office, his phone buzzed with an email. It was from the job he had always dreamed of, the job he never thought he could get. It was an offer. It was a dream come true. But it also came with a price. It would mean leaving everything behind. His friends, his family, his comfort zone. David stared at the screen, the words blurring before him. His palms began to sweat. The choice was before him. Stay stuck in a life that was safe, but suffocating, or step into the unknown, face the challenges, and risk everything for a shot at the life he always wanted. He glanced around the empty office, his heart racing. His life was on the line. One decision would change everything. And then everything changed. David couldn't sleep. He hadn't been able to sleep for days. The constant pressure of the new job, the endless deadlines, the silent resentment from his colleagues. Every waking moment felt like a battle. No matter how hard he pushed, it seemed like the world pushed back harder. He had taken the job, hoping it would change everything. But now he was just barely keeping his head above water. The office felt colder every day, as if the walls were closing in on him. Susan, who he thought of as a friend, was no longer the same. She smiled, but there was an edge to it now. A few days ago, he'd caught her in a conversation with their boss, speaking in hushed tones. When she noticed him, her smile vanished. There was no mistaking it now. She wasn't just a colleague, she was a threat. David worked late that night. As usual, he hadn't eaten in hours, and his hands were shaking from the lack of sleep. But he kept going. He had to finish the project. This was his one shot. But when he emailed it to the boss, his heart sank. The file had been corrupted. The hours, the sleepless nights, the sacrifices, they were all for nothing. He had nothing left to give. He slumped in his chair, staring at the screen, feeling the walls close in on him. What now? He had no more fight left. He couldn't do it anymore. His head pounded. His body ached. And the weight of his failure crushed him. And then came the phone call. His boss again. He let the phone ring, not caring anymore. What was the point? He wasn't good enough. He wasn't strong enough. Everything he had worked for, everything he had sacrificed, was slipping through his fingers like sand in the wind. His body felt heavy, his mind foggy, and his spirit broken. David stared at the phone, his hands trembling. The screen remained dark, void of any messages, void of any reason to keep going. His apartment was eerily quiet, the kind of silence that presses in on you until you can't breathe. The echoes of his failures were deafening. The job he thought would change everything had slipped away. The friendships he'd tried to hold on to had crumbled. His own reflection in the mirror now seemed like a stranger. Where was that dreamer, the one who believed anything was possible? He ran a hand through his hair, tugging it out of frustration. Maybe they were right. Maybe he wasn't cut out for this. The thoughts echoed in his mind, relentless. Every ounce of energy he had put into this, gone. All the sleepless nights, the missed family dinners, the self-doubt, it had all led to this moment. And for what? The tears welled up, but he didn't let them fall. He couldn't. He had no more fight left in him. He had reached his breaking point. He closed his eyes, trying to push the ache away, but the weight of it all seemed unbearable. Maybe it was time to give up. Maybe he was never meant to win. And then asterisk, the voice, a soft whisper in his mind, "You are stronger than you think. You were born to overcome." It was his mother's voice, the one he hadn't heard in years. He could almost see her standing there, her warm smile, her eyes full of hope. He hadn't thought about those words in so long, but now they hit him like a jolt of electricity. Maybe he wasn't done. Not yet. David took a deep breath, as if pulling himself back from the edge. Something inside him shifted. He wasn't done. Not yet. David stood in front of the mirror once more. This time he didn't look at the reflection with disdain. He looked at it with purpose. Every scar, every bruise, each one told a story. And that story, it wasn't over yet. He wasn't done. Not by a long shot. The first step was small. An early morning run. It wasn't impressive. His legs burned, and his lungs ached. But it was enough. He finished the run, and the feeling was like nothing he'd experienced in months. It wasn't about the distance. It was about the fact that he had done it. He had pushed past his limits. The next day he took a deep breath and made the call. The call he'd been avoiding for weeks. He dialed the number of the one person who had tried to hold him back the most. His old mentor. "I'm not here to ask for your approval anymore," he said. His voice steady, clear. "I'm doing this for me." The words were simple, but they felt like a revolution. With each passing moment, David felt the chains that had once bound him tighten, then snap. The mental blocks were crumbling. He wasn't afraid anymore. Fear had no power over him. He walked into the office that morning with a new sense of purpose. The walls no longer felt like they were closing in. The same people who once doubted him, they no longer held any weight in his life. David had broken free. This was the moment he'd been waiting for. He wasn't just in the game anymore. He was playing to win. David's heart pounded as he approached the final stretch. Every muscle in his body screamed for rest. But the finish line was so close, so within reach. His vision blurred with sweat, his legs threatening to buckle beneath him. The crowd cheered, but he could hardly hear them. He only heard the voice in his head, the one that told him he wasn't enough, that he'd never make it. Was this the moment he finally failed? The doubt was deafening. But then, something shifted. His mind cleared for a moment, and he remembered all the people who believed in him. His mother's face, the mentors who had poured everything into his growth. He remembered the long nights, the sacrifices, the pain. This wasn't just about crossing the line. It was about who he was becoming. David pushed forward. His body wanted to give in, but his spirit was stronger. Each step felt like a battle, but he kept moving. He wasn't just running a race. He was fighting for his life. And then it happened. Not in a grand, explosive moment, but in a quiet realization. He wasn't first, but he was here. He had done it. He'd fought the hardest battle of all against his own doubts and fears, and he had won. It wasn't the victory he expected, but it was the victory he needed. He had transformed. He had broken through, and that was worth more than any trophy or applause. He had proven to himself that he was capable of far more than he had ever dreamed. David's story wasn't just about running that race. It wasn't just about that final victory. His story in many ways is your story too. Every one of us has faced moments of doubt. Every one of us has been pushed to the edge, where the choice to quit feels like the easiest thing to do. But here's the thing, David made it through, not because of external victories, but because of the strength he found within himself. And you have that same strength. You have that same fire burning inside of you, but are you going to let it stay buried? Are you going to let fear hold you back from becoming who you were always meant to be? Think about it. How long have you been waiting? Waiting for the right moment? Waiting for the perfect circumstances? The truth is, the time will never feel perfect. So ask yourself, how much longer will you let fear control your actions? How much longer will you let your doubts shape your destiny? Your story isn't over. It's just beginning. Right now, you're standing at the crossroads. The decisions you make today will shape the person you'll become tomorrow. Will you take the leap? Will you choose to fight for the life you truly want? The power to change, to step into your greatness, is in your hands right now. You just need to take the first step. So I ask you right now, will you commit? Will you decide that you are never going to settle for average again? That you're here for more than just a routine existence? You were never meant to be average. You were meant for greatness. And now it's time to prove it.